Answering unanswered questions from Roots Part 3. Assalamu alaikum, my name is Yasmin. I have over 15 years of experience in community care, mentorship, and counseling. Every week at Roots, during the lecture series on Monday and Tuesday nights, there goes a lot of unanswered questions during the anonymous Q&A portion due to the sheer number of questions. And I'm just answering them in hopes that it might be of use to some people, inshallah. How do you deal with overthinking all the time? It feels like my mind is always running. Overthinking sucks. When I think of the idea of overthinking, I think of somebody who doubts and second guesses and has a hard time making decisions, or ruminates about the past, or doesn't really trust themselves. Should I do this? Should I not do this? Why did I do that? The key for making sure you don't overthink too much is, well, there's two things. One of them is tawakkul, and the other one is knowing yourself, your values, and grounding yourself in those things. I'll start with the second one, which is knowing yourself and your values and grounding yourself in that. Once you know, okay, did my actions align with my values? Did my behavior align with what I believe is true and right? You have to get really, really clear on what that means, because a lot of people might tell you what they believe is the right thing, or their ideas of the best way to approach things is, but you might have a slightly different opinion than that. It's a very subjective realm of, like, when we talk about concepts like respect, or concept around just being loving or being considerate, like, everyone has different opinions about that. So if you're having a hard time narrowing down what that looks like for you, go back to the seerah of the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Look into his life and how he dealt with people and what the most courteous way he was with people. And another important thing to think about is, when you think about your values, think about what the balanced version of that value looks like and what the unbalanced value looks like in comparison. So for example, being kind to people is a value, right? But is there such thing as being so kind to the point where it's a detriment to you? Yes. Yes, you're being kind, but also you're making sure you're not being so kind that you're neglecting yourself. And then when you find yourself overthinking about situations that had happened, then we go back to my values. If logically speaking, you didn't do anything that misaligns with your values, then you can go into the tawakkul piece here. You did your best, you checked that your intentions were sincere, and then you give the rest to Allah. And what does that mean, to give the rest to Allah? It means that I'm going to ask Allah to help me, to guide me through the process of whatever choices I made. And then I'm going to let it go and be just aware of any signs that Allah sends my way to indicate if I need to do something differently. If you're not sure, then ask Allah for a clearer sign. One last tip when it comes to the overthinking, a feature of somebody who's an overthinker, they may have a lot of people in their lives who has a lot of opinions, what they're doing wrong or what they're doing right, or like instructing them how to do something. So if you find that you have a lot of people giving a lot of opinions to you in your life, try to maybe be more private about your own experience and consult yourself and think with yourself about what feels right and what doesn't. Because sometimes it can become a crutch to the point where we ask other people's opinions so much that we stop trusting ourselves altogether. How do we deal with angry people? The art of loving boundaries. I have a video about this on my YouTube. Please go check it out. And if you feel like it doesn't fully answer your question, just send me a DM and we can talk about your specific issue, inshallah. Sibling with a secret boyfriend. When I tell my parents, nothing really changes, but she gets sneakier and distrusts me. Should I keep telling? Do I get sins for not? Is dua enough? So it sounds like your sibling is making their own decisions at this point. It's out of your hands, and just like you said, the result is just that your sibling doesn't trust you and your sibling gets sneakier. So whenever we see someone we care about engaging in a behavior that we think is harmful for them or unhealthy for them, it's not gonna do anything to just say, no, you can't. It's not going to change anybody's mind. Your sibling maybe doesn't think that this is wrong for them. It might feel abundantly obvious to you, this is haram, we shouldn't do this, but maybe they don't understand why it's haram and so they just go off and do it themselves. Maybe your sibling doesn't care about religion as much as you do. Maybe your sibling is struggling with a crisis of faith. Like, there's so many different things that your sibling might be thinking about that you have to engage with on a fundamental level if you even hope to try and persuade your sibling to do something differently. But if you want to guide your sibling, you feel like your sibling is engaging in something that's haram, go first to the fundamentals. Why is it haram in the first place? Have you actually done the research to understand why this is something that Allah puts parameters around? Because relationships are not haram when it's in a particular context, right? And the question is, why that context, right? We're so fixated on wrong, haram, 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 that we don't look at, okay, how do we make this halal? Marriage, right? You might say, my sibling's too young for marriage, but why are we looking at marriage? Why is that the thing? Well, when we look into the usul of the fiqh, right? The spirit of the wisdom of why that these things are considered halal or haram. Relationships lead to sexual activity, which is the act that produces children, right? So the reason why we have the parameters around marriage is to make sure that if a pregnancy accidentally happens, that there are rights and protection, like protection rights that are placed for the person who's pregnant. Because it's very easy in our society and in society at large, without parameters in place, without contractual agreements, for someone to get somebody pregnant and then dip. And that person is left in a very vulnerable situation. And abortion is not accessible to everybody. Another component, which is if we have unfettered sexual relationships, we increase our likelihood of STDs, for example. Yes, people can get tested, but there's no way for the law to reinforce this as a thing that people are required to do. It's kind of based on an honor system, right? So all these reasons are there in place to make sure that we can have healthy relationships with the opposite sex without it turning into something that can lead to leaving people in vulnerable situations. Does your sibling understand that? Does your sibling care? Is your sibling even religious or spiritual? If they're not, you might have to start at the bare basics. You might have to be like, do you even believe in Islam? Is Islam important to you? Like, do you want to be doing this? Like, maybe your sibling is agnostic. Like, so, and when you tattletale on your sibling, you're not fostering any kind of trust or guidance that your sibling might want to engage in. Your sibling's just going to be like, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing and I'm going to hide it from you. Someone is venting to you about someone and you're trying to be a good friend and active listening, do you get backbiting sins? It feels rude to tell people to never vent. Actually, Ustadth Abdelrahman answered this one already. If someone's talking to you, opening up to you about something, don't engage so deeply that it's just like a constant barrage of complaints about a person and there's nothing productive coming out of it. If this person is seeking advice and is trying to figure out how to either resolve the relationship or create boundaries in the relationship or take care of themselves while maintaining this relationship, and you feel like you can be of help and assistance and they're genuinely getting help from it and they're not constantly coming back to you with more drama about this person, then you know it's okay. But if you find that, like Ustadth Abdelrahman was like, you're constantly just like, wow, that's crazy, then that's an indicator that this is probably not going anywhere. Another thing is this person going to everyone talking about this same issue and spreading it among a lot of different people? If it is, then that person's probably not trying to be productive about it and can be considered backbiting. How would you say is the best way to deal with people who have turned away from Islam because of experiences with someone who made everything haram / an argument? You know what's funny? Every time somebody asks the question, what's the best way to deal with, and then insert question here, they're always trying to ask how do I control this person's behavior? Or how do I respond to them in a way that I can change their minds, right? So anytime I see that, my first thing I'm going to answer your question, but the first thing I'm going to say is stop wanting to change the condition of other people all the time. we have this tendency to like really want other people to believe what we believe, to be on the same page as us, but instead it's just like we have to recognize and honor that everybody's on their own journey. And if Allah wants to utilize us as a guide for that person, He will. It will, like, words will just come out and you'll know what to say. If not, and you don't know what to say and you feel like they have a really good point, that might be Allah wanting you to explore this issue in general. You might question for yourself, well, what would I do in this situation? And maybe get curious about your, I'm assuming it's a friend, your friend's experience of why that's happening, right? Not everything that a person is going through is an invitation for you to change their minds or to fix them or to heal them. I know the intention is in the right place, and inshallah they do. It's a good intention to have, but sometimes you just have to bear witness. Sometimes you just have to get really curious and hold space. And then as a result, you might find that this person starts to lean more towards your way of being because they realize like, oh, this person is at peace. Like this person is not trying to make everything haram or turn it into an argument, right? So like you're here trying to argue with this person that, that they shouldn't turn away from Islam, but they're like sick of being argued with. I'm not saying that you're picking an argument literally, but an argument is what? Someone trying to convince you of their way, of their point without really listening, right? It turns into an argument when listening is lost. So just be an active listener, hold space. And then very often what people want is just to be heard and to be listened to. They don't necessarily want that person to change their minds. If that person starts to ask you questions or asks you what you think, then it's fine, like offer your opinion and stuff like that. But I think that the person who's turning away from Islam feels turned away from the community. And unfortunately, a lot of people say, the deen or Allah is perfect and people are not. Yes. And when a person feels turned away from the deen because of how people have treated them, that is now what your role is to witness how the community has failed this person and be the person that they didn't have in the community, which is somebody who just listened, who didn't judge, who held space, who got curious. I think we have really lost the art of deep curiosity and active listening as a community in general. We're so ready to just like want to give our opinions, to change people's minds. Just get curious and hold space. Salam Ustadh, I'm beating myself up for the guilt of every single person I've ever hurt and the fear of them remembering and hating me. Yeah, totally understandable. Feeling guilt is a real thing that and having a lot of regret and remorse about hurting people, the pain of that is real. But I want you to also understand that there is a difference between guilt and shame. And so with the research that was done by Dr. Brene Brown, she did research on guilt and on shame on individuals. And the difference between guilt and shame is that guilt is, I did something bad, whereas shame is, I am fundamentally bad. And guilt has been positively correlated with a healthier sense of self, better relationships, better, outcomes and outlooks, better mental health, better all the things, much healthier a person. And shame has been associated with a low sense of self-worth, higher rates of depression, anxiety, addictions, eating disorders, and suicidal ideation. Why is that? Guilt is able to hold the seeming paradox that I can do something, a behavior that is bad, while at the same time I can hold the fact that I'm still a good person at my core. And that's so crucial because if you can be okay with your core, you can respond to your mistakes accordingly by taking responsibility, by apologizing, by doing better, and not letting it define who you are. Because we're not defined by our mistakes, we are defined by how we respond to those mistakes. So when we have shame, which says to us, I am just not okay, I'm not okay as a person, I'm just wrong, I'm all wrong, and all these actions define me, well then how do we change that? How do we even work with that? And so when that happens, when a person is experiencing deep shame, is that a person starts to do one of two things. either spiral into complete self-hatred and self-contempt and like constant rumination about what they did wrong and beating themselves up, or they will go into the opposite, which is I will refuse to admit that I did anything wrong, and I'll refuse to take responsibility for any of my behaviors, and I'm not going to say I'm sorry. They're not even letting themselves admit that they did anything wrong, because if I admit I did something wrong, then I'm admitting that I am not a good person. Then I'm admitting that at my core I am rotten. And so they're constantly running from their shame, which makes them run from taking responsibility for their behaviors, because they're worried that if I take responsibility for my behavior, then I'm admitting that I am faulty in and of myself. So make sure when you think back about the things that you did wrong, that you can hold guilt where you're like, okay, I wronged these people. And then think about, okay, did I write this wrong? Did I apologize to these people? It's never too late to apologize to someone for something. Should I have a conversation with them? If you feel like you can't do that because it'll actually make things worse to reach out and try to apologize, then leave it up to Allah, make your tawbah, and use it as a framework to learn how to approach your relationships in the future so that you don't do it again. But just know at your core, your essential self, your ruh, your soul, is pure.